Continuing Orthodoxy and Reform, which is chapter 5 in book 2, the Parsees in The Treasure of the Magi, a study of modern Zoroastrianism by James Hope Moulton. Mazda Yasnahe, Zarathustra would have been the older version of that name. Because Mazda Yasni is the essential point. It's not like every faith should be named after a human, Both the Eastern and the Western elements in their environment have profoundly influenced the Parsees. They are proud of their accessibility to new ideas, and there is no section in India which knows so well how to make use of what the West can give. But they are thoroughly Oriental for all that, and the combination of qualifications gives them unique advantages as intermediaries between East and West. Unfortunately, they have only used this faculty in the sphere of practical life, especially in the field of commerce. Such shining examples as B.M. Malabari and Dadabhai Naoroji show what the Parsi mind can do in politics and social reform by virtue of this gift. Incalculable benefits would come to the Parsees and to India if there were given to this keenly intelligent and accessible people a man of religious genius and religious fervor. Hinduism, if we may use the term comprehensively, claims today such writers as Sir Rabindranath Tagore. I have a translation of one of his works. That might be something that could be shared. And Mrs. Sarojini Naidu, who were able to make the West understand some of the fragrance of Indian poetic thought. Rudyard Kipling, in inspired pieces like The Miracle of Purun Bhagat, has helped his countrymen to realize the best side of Hindu mysticism. But if a Parsi of Malabari's fervor and open-mindedness should arise to interpret, there would be hope that the real contribution of India to religious thought would at last take shape. The Indian mind is strongly developed on the imaginative side, but very difficult in the critical faculty. The Parsi has less of the former than the Hindu, less of the latter than the Breton, but at his best he shows a better blend of the two than any other of the sons of the East. A very small community which has put its brains into commerce, law, and to a less extent medicine, is by the ordinary working of probabilities not very likely to produce the genius we desiderate. But should he come in an age not prolific of religious genius in either East or West, he would assuredly be the instrument of a wonderful work of good for all the world alike. The impulse towards reform came to the Parsees very largely through their contact with the West, and on chronological grounds may therefore be treated first. The general principle of the reformers has been the desire to cut out of Zoroastrianism all that could not stand the rigid tests of pure reason. I mean, why should they do it, but not the Christians? Well, I mean, if the facts are against something, the facts are against something, but people can reason out all sorts of stuff. That's why very intelligent people go insane at higher rates. A leader among them, a man of distinguished public service and profound religious conviction, set forth in an official utterance the claim that there was nothing in Zoroastrianism to differentiate it from rationalism or Unitarianism. Well, definitely in its roots, Mazda Yasnahe Zarathustra is all praise, songs, celebrations are for God. So they're only worshiping one, not the angels, not the others, but it's became almost non-separate in pretty much every group you're going to look at. Ahriman may be regarded as a kind of personification of evil impulses within us. Other picturesque doctrines are parables of the central truth that God is one, and we must please him by good thoughts, words, and deeds, convinced that if we do so, it will be well with us in a world beyond death. It will be instructive to quote the message in full. From the address of the President of the Fourth Zoroastrian Conference, 1913, Mr. H.J. Dahaba, late Director of the Public Instruction in Mysore State, and I've seen some of the modern clips of such conferences. I therefore beg of you, with all the earnestness I am capable of, to set about the business of reform in religious matters. The first and most imperative need of the times is to have a simple creed of Zoroastrian religion. When the fundamental beliefs are formulated, it will be seen how singularly free of all dogmas that the Zoroastrian creed is. Well, if a dogma is a firmly held belief, well, it should be firmly held because it's right, not because, well, I've came across it and I've been told it. The one dogma, which is often hurried at the heads of Zoroastrians by the enemies of our faith, namely, the doctrine of two independent self-created deities, Spentamenu and Engramenu. Well, entities. The light beings, the perfect light beings, the fire beings, certainly the evil ones being led by Engramenu forever, some branching off from that, maybe returning to the good side, whatever, but continually fighting with each other is not accepted by the best exponents of our faith. These opposing so-called deities being only the good and evil motives or feelings in our own mind, which are opposed to each other, before a man endowed with free will decides in favor of the good motives and bases of his action upon them alone. If this dogma is discarded, there is nothing like a dogma left in the articles of our faith, which can be reduced to a very simple belief in an omniscient, all-bountiful, and omnipotent God, who insists on good thought, good word, and good action, and ordains evil to the evildoer and blessings to the pure, both in this world and in the next, according to their thoughts, words, and deeds. If our creed is thus authoritatively formulated by an ecclesiastical council formed of the best religious experts in our community, it will stand out in most favorable contrast to the creeds of other religious systems, which I need hardly name, and which embody a number of dogmas that human reason cannot accept in the present time of advanced thought. I would dwell for a moment on this aspect of our religion. It is singularly free from dogmas, and it is so simple in its tenets that it differs but little from Unitarianism or rationalism. Its system of morality is extremely simple, straightforward, and practical, like the practical morality of Freemasons. It is not overlaid with metaphysical distinctions and disquisitions such as are found in the Hindu schools of philosophy, which, however ingenious and subtle they may be from an academic point of view, have led to harassing and unpractical observances. The progress and prosperity of the Parsis are not a little indebted to their religion, which enjoins righteousness in thought, word, and deed, vigorous activity of body and mind, a hatred of asceticism, purity of conduct, cleanliness of habits, stern punishment, and suppression of all evildoers, love of all mankind, and charity without distinction of caste or creed. All evil doing might be a better way to put that, because all evil doers, name, I challenge you, name anybody who's hit puberty that's not on that list. But that doesn't mean they're sinners because they've had some sin somewhere. Let's not go to that length either. It will be easily seen that the dangers of this attitude is the emphasis on the negative. Reforming Parsis are so busy denying and denouncing that they have difficulty in assertion. The very simple creed to which they reduce their religious belief is always liable to be curtailed. A traveler with empty pockets, says Horace, will sing when he passes the hymen. Okay, I've passes the highwayman. They really need to put things on if they're going to use hyphens. Oh, hi. Oh, that's why I read it that way, because there's a... Okay. Passes the highwayman. But these pockets are not yet empty. Their treasures include a real, albeit cold, theism and a belief in an ethical doctrine of immortality. These great fundamentals are eminently in accord with reason, but reason alone will never establish them. The materialist philosophers of the last generation, but one, who are still quoted in India as representative authorities by both friends and foes of Western thought, would ruthlessly pick the traveler's pocket of even these reasonable possessions, and a creed which aims to satisfying the intellect, but pays insufficient attention to the needs of the heart, is very imperfectly armed against such depredators. So prominent a reformer as the late K.R. Kama, one of the most learned of Parsis, and a layman, is said to have taken a completely agnostic position. There are not wanting men of real spirituality in the movement. But viewed broadly, it cannot be said that reform has discovered much that appeals to spiritual craving. It is natural to compare it with the great movement that holds by the Reformation in Christendom. Every student of church history knows that if the Reformation had not been even mainly a protest against the errors of Rome, it would not have survived in its first impulse. It lives because its protest, in the historical sense, the glad affirmation of great positive principles of religious life. Parsi reformers have nothing of this kind to keep their movement alive. Vacuum sedem in ania arcana is the true motto of their system, and until they have become constructive, they are doomed to fail. From this generalization, we may turn to some specific points on which reformers take a line of their own. Very conspicuous is their instance on the right of the community to accept new members from outside. They are, of course, incontrovertible. When they urge that Zarathustra was a passionately eager propagandist, and that a small caste like the modern Parsis have no claim to stand in his succession. This is not denied, but the whole stress is laid on the changed conditions of a caste with certain privileges, with charities to dispense, and exclusive rights to maintain. It very soon appears that both sides are fighting on this issue, the larger conception of a missionary religion being absolutely invisible anywhere. The writer has strongly urged in addressing Parsi meetings that their possession in the Gathas of a pure and ethical monotheism constitutes a call to preach, placed as they are in the midst of millions whose so-called gods are many and malignant. There has been no visible response to this plea. When first urged, the reform organ immediately acclaimed a new recruit to their case, in spite of very plain words, which may be quoted as showing how the issue was placed before them. I long for the service warm-hearted Zoroastrians might render to lead their countrymen to higher ideals. I am not referring to the vexed question of proselytism. Whether you should admit outsiders to the privileges of your own community is a purely domestic question for yourselves, on which I should consider it almost an impertinence to have an opinion quite apart from expressing it. But I cannot believe there are any among you who want to have a monopoly of a pure doctrine of God, a lofty view of duty, and the promise of happiness as the eternal reward of well-doing. I feel that we may ask for your sympathy and even your help in putting such an emancipating gospel before the people whose only idea of God is one of terror. Well, love, hope, fear, and hate are essential elements to theology. It must be possible to entertain this unselfish ambition without clashing against the principle which forbids your enlarging the Parsi community. I can assure you from experience in other circles of religion that such a passion for sharing the good things of your ancient faith with multitudes who are in spiritual darkness is the one certain way of bringing a new springtide of life into your own people and into your own individual souls. May the wise Lord himself give you wisdom and blessing. And this is from the Zoroastrian Inheritance, February 11th, 1916. And it's corrected some bit from the Teaching of Zarathustra, page 9 and 10. Okay. The misinterpretation of these words was successfully cleared up, but it is recalled here by way of showing how far the missionary idea is from the mind of either party. The reformers want to admit proselytes who will practically always be wives or husbands of Parsis because they are afraid of the castes dying out. The Orthodox are unwilling to give other people the gospel of their prophet because they fear it would lead to proselytism, which means for them the admission of undesirable outsiders to the privileges of their community. Well, why not better the world and those people at it? But actually, as much as some of that happens, certainly converts or reverts, as some people would call it, include of the best individuals of the communities. If Zarathustra were to return from Gronmana, he would have to search long for a Zoroastrian after his missionary heart. Another subject about which the reformers are in revolt is the use of prayers in a dead language, unknown to 90% of those who use them. Well, what a better way to change the religion than to say, well, we're only going to use translations, which you're going to lose some of the meaning, or you're going to change it to what you feel that the spirit of it is. And but you spread it with the thing that Muhammad told people to learn about these cultures and the religions. That's what I'm doing on this page, learning about these cultures and religions and speaking to them about Islam through that. And that's what happened. It wasn't that, oh, well, just recite the Quran in Arabic and it doesn't matter whether or not anybody understands what's being said. No. If you can't mean the Shahada, it's worthless. It's a worthless statement. Islam definitely, say it all you want. Like the passage, Surah 63, those who come, there are people who come testifying that you're the God's messenger, prophet, but they're really deniers. So they're saying it with their mouths, but they don't mean it. And these were people who spoke Arabic, so, but learning the connection to the old language, the fact of it being present among the majority of talking in whatever language the people speak, like Gujarati and Pahlavi and stuff like that, it adds an intelligence, a music, a style to the community that's maybe able to be used more in the future in ways that aren't currently used. How the latter Orthodox defend this practice we shall see presently. Here it is enough to observe that the old Avestan prayers and formula have sacred associations for the people, and it would be safer to interpret and to supplement them than to abolish them. Well, how can you abolish the revelation and the inspiration for interpretation? And that's what really doctrinal books are. The Christian Old Testament is not really a direct translation. I don't think there's any version that actually directly translates it. There's some leaning translations in particular, even when it does. So all depends on the prayers which are substituted. There's prayer and there's supplication. Prayers tends to be more like a ritual in most languages. It's only in English where we don't really think of prayer as, I'll do it how you want, and there's no method to it, and no wonder why so many grimoires appeared. One prominent reformer told the writer that he regularly used the Lord's Prayer, which is a rewrite of something from centuries before, but for his petition, there was nothing better. Or you can actually say it's a version of something that happened in Armenia, but probably happened in Greek first. I think it happened in Greek first. It may not have, but our provider in heaven, such and such. For his petition, there was nothing better. That is a real step with the old Mobeds on the way to Sha'oshant in Bethlehem. Of course, they didn't understand the world savior idea in the way that these people understood the world savior idea. This may be to put the reformers' campaign against ceremonies which, for them, are mostly meaningless. They insist on the Gathas as the norm, and the latter Avesta and its ceremonial system as declension. It is time to return to the simpler and purer faith of the founder. They not only abandon most of the ceremonies for themselves, but preach the futility of them for a people so advanced as the Parsis. Here we see very naturally the same uneasiness about childish ritual that is apparently among the educated Hindus, and there is the same double effect upon the community, one extremely giving up with undisguised contempt what seems too puerile for a highly cultured class, the other taking refuge behind the welcome screen of theosophy, the true quality of which is for the present not realized. Now, yeah, it's trying to simplify other faiths, like, not even, the New Testament doesn't really quite stand up in terms of not only not revelation, but not inspiration either. Legends about Jesus and the others, that sort of thing happened, but it wasn't quite, the same. There may be something of that sort in that book, but this jealousy of other communities of actually working with their revelations and inspirations and making that something acceptable in their life and making that actually something that they feel good about using. Why not? And even if it's wrong, it's their freedom to do such. We don't need to, insulting them is not really going to, or they're childish for trying to keep to their religion. And you find this ritualism among Protestants that, they are just as ritualistic as everybody else, except they tend to make their ritualism outside of religion, although their religion does have elements that they, seems they have a general idea, but they don't want to kind of repeat too much, so it's like groping in the dark, and maybe one service is going to be better than the others. A lot of churches seem like that to me. To the revolt against ritual, the use of a dead language in worship, the Reformers add another subject of protest which links them on the negative side with the Reformed form of Christianity. We have already commented on the controversy that rages still as to intercessory masses for the dead. In Parsi theology, the heresy was occasioned by the failure to distinguish between Irvan and Farvashi, the individual soul and the heavenly counterpart which existed before birth. So says the Reformer. But if the doctrine is accepted that Irvan and the Fravashi are united at death, it does not become so clear that the Orthodox were wrong. Moreover, we have seen that, historically, the Fravashi is an ancestor spirit, pure and simple, on one side of his evolution, copiously illustrated in the Farvardin Yasht. The identification of the two after death is therefore no mere afterthought of Pahlavi rabbins, Mobids. It is a fair inference from the Yasht, and is indeed directly countenanced by a sentence that stands in the Avesta text, and can only be condemned as a gloss on the purely subjective grounds. But Does this justify saying masses to get a soul out of hell? There is no question about a Fravashi here. The Fravashi of Dava Yasnian simply does not exist as such, and as a matter of fact, the Fravashi is altogether out of sight in the All Souls Feast. It is inconsistent with any doctrine of the felicity of the righteous. Dwellers in the house of song do not need to come back once a year to their sorrowing relatives for gifts of food and clothing. And this Dashter Adam Daniels talked about a soul exorcism, and this is what I believe could be going on there. They're banishing the Fravashi. The whole doctrine of the All Souls anniversary is far older than either Zoroastrianism or Christianity, and is not easy to reconcile with either. The Avestan system, from first to last, declares that a man goes to heaven or hell according to the total of his merits or demerits, weighs heavier in the scale. To get a footing for intercession, if the Barashnum ceremony can be interpreted as such without sacrificing this general doctrine of the weighing of merits and demerits, is flatly impossible. Whether the reformer is more successful in giving a rational account of the ceremony held for the dead after the fourth day, when his destiny is determined, may be equally questioned. The ceremonies are for the Fravashi of the dead man, not for his soul, and therefore benefit the living, who are helped by the powerful spirit when thus invoked. The theory implies that the dead man is pious, and that the Fravashi attached to him will be perpetuated by ceremonies of the kind. How to prove on principles of unassisted reason that exalted spiritual beings care for rites like the Barashnum, we must leave it to the Parsi to discover, or anybody else who witnesses that there are real spiritual beings other than our own souls out there that can possibly interact with us as a result of what we're doing. We don't have to necessarily worship them for that to happen either. To the outsider, at any rate, the problem seems no easy one. Among the ceremonial practices against which the enlightened have revolted, those imposed on women have been conspicuous. A rule which forbids a woman during a period of technical impurity to look upon the dead body of her nearest relative seems to be self-condemned. Now, Islam teaches, for example, a difference that Christianity and Judaism and some of the other delineations off the perennial path, you could say, is that there's a difference between dirty and keep away from. The bleeding and the sexual fluids, and you started the sexual acts with your spouse, these are keep away from states that you wash up as best as one can before entering into the prayers and the communities and such. But the dirty, the going to the bathroom and stuff, you also clean up, but there's a dirty. So a believer isn't a fornicator. A believer, the status of believer isn't, they don't even show their private parts. If they're in that state, how can they be dirty? In that respect, their sex is not dirty because it's within marriage, That's seems self-condemned. Like the use of Gomez, against which all sense of refinement protests, except under the most powerful influence of religious conviction, the rules appealed to men of a modern turn of mind as relics of a bygone age, which no longer justified themselves to the intellect and made no appeal to the heart. The reformers could give them up without difficulty in their own personal practice. There is no authority in the Parsi community which can excommunicate a Parsi for neglect of religious rules. Well, all actions can be religious, so therefore any violation, murder and stuff like, they have to interact with those, and those are certainly religious rules. And when the reformer tries to enforce his views upon others, there is no assembly that can settle the question by its vote. Nothing follows the hot discussion but conviction on the part of some and fury on the part of the unthinking are the unconvinced. It is with them even as in the lost paradise, and of their vain dispute appeared no end. And we have now to ask how educated and refined Parsees devised an apologetic for ancient usage which would act as a temporary shelter against the monsoon deluge of modernism. The desiderated umbrella is one of a convenient shape, specially designed for the Indian climate. It is in large use among the Hindus, a strictly modern patient which has not been taken up in the West except by a few freaks. It is only a very old invention, made to look new. It used to be called Gnosticism. It is now called Theosophy, an appropriate term for a system of fantastic sophistry, which sets itself to make theism absurd. The difference between it and its ancient prototype is that Gnosticism was most honest, a character which the founders of Theosophy hardly troubled to claim. The system was nursed in fraud and has matured in immortality. Parsees have mostly forsaken it as an organized system just because of its unsavory character, but the habit of mind introduced by it has unfortunately spread widely among them. Theosophy as a whole lies outside the subject of this book, but no one who wants to understand the Parsees can ignore it. The restrained but damning exposure and Dr. Farquhar's Modern Religious Movements in India should be carefully read, and the Christian Literature Society pamphlets by Reverend E. W. Thompson, a very able Parsi scholar. Professor P. A. Wadia published a searching critique in 1904 and more lately has edited an English and Gujarati serial, the Journal of the Iranian Association, which has for its chief aim the exposure of theosophic heresy as it affects Parsi religion. It will suffice to mention these outstanding examples of a much needed candor. In England, the whole thing seems to be intensely stupid, that the importance of studying and exposing it is altogether overlooked. That is a very serious mistake. In itself, it is no more worth studying than the writings of the late Mrs. Baker Eddy. But, as a phrase of Hinduism, it does call for study. See, they have to insult other Christian groups too, right? But, as a phase of Hinduism, it does call for study from all who take India to heart. There is no reason for either despising or reprobating the Indian who passes the base metal which Western coiners have palmed off on him.